Welcome, my name is Marc Sanchez, Senior Counsel and founder of Contract In-House Counsel and Consultants, FDA ADDI. And we're here today to talk about a very important issue, Form 483, the observations that occur within a facility that can lead to a warning letter. In particular, we're going to look back at 2013 for the top 10 observations in 3 FDA-regulated categories to find out what that list of common observations are in order to better prepare for that inspection, whether it be in surveillance or for cause, and determine how we can shape what's going on in a facility to better prepare for this most common enforcement mechanism we see from the Food and Drug Administration. So we're going to begin by coming back to a question that's very important. We have some presentations that talk about the Form 43, warning letters, the relationship, and in particular, how to address and respond to a Form 43. But to make sure that we're all starting on the same page today, we are going to look at the Form 43 at this slide and then get into the most common observations. So Form 43 is an enforcement tool that follows an inspection. It occurs for all FDA regulated products. If you are regulated by the FDA, then you will experience a Form 43 at some point. And this is called an Inspectional Observations, and it is just as it describes. It's a list of observations, significant and minor. Typically the minor ones are talked to by investigators to the facility owner or manager during that time. So really the Form 43 catches all of the significant violations or potential violations are included in that form. This inspection can be routine surveillance, it can be a pre-inspection approval for devices, it can be domestic and foreign, and it can also be for cause, meaning that the FDA has a belief that either this facility or a supplier or some component related to this facility is involved in a recall, an adverse event, or some other complaint that would require the FDA to come and investigate. The observations are then reviewed. They go from a field investigator to a district director or a center director, along with what's called an establishment inspection report. And together, this tells the FDA side of the story about how these are potential violations, the significance of these violations, and whether or not these violations warrant a warning letter. But again, they're only one half of the story, and it's very vital to respond and to provide the facility side of the story as well. And that response only has 10 days to be drafted, and that's a very critical and short time frame to provide a response, but that's the time that the FDA gives you is 10 days to develop a response. Significant violations will lead to a warning letter, so does a poor response. If a response is fired off as soon as you get the Form 43, then the FDA is left with the impression, and this is the conversations that we've had with many compliance directors in the district offices, is the FDA gets the impression that the facility doesn't understand the magnitude or the ability to correct these issues in a longer time frame than that one-day response. And it's often that you'll see in that response, yes, we've seen the observations, and yes, they're corrected. And the FDA says that simply doesn't make sense. So a quick response, and if one that isn't thought out, can also lead to warning letters. Now, it's always good practice. Some facilities operate at a very high level. They follow ISOs or they do some other high level of good manufacturing practice, and they don't get a Form 43 issued because there are no observations. There's no significant deviations that can't be addressed through a casual conversation with the inspector. But it's still very important to provide a written response to put a bookend to this experience you've had with the FDA and to develop a written record. Remember, the FDA's mantra, what it operates under is if it's not recorded, it doesn't happen. And that's what the field investigators will tell you when they come into a facility asking for records. So it's important to apply that mantra to the agency that's giving it to you. So always provide a written bookend and recapping that experience and recapping the observations and the conversations you had with the investigators. It's very important, even if there isn't a formal FDA Form 43 issued. So now we're going to segue and we're going to move into 3 FDA regulated categories here, starting with food and looking at the most common observations and see what we can learn from those. And what we see with the top observations in the food category is that it's unchanged. And for as long as FDA ADDI has been working in this area and assisting clients in 483 and warning letter responses, this list has not changed. And it may change in the coming years as we look at the Food Safety Modernization Act. There will definitely be some changes that come along. But at this point, we simply haven't seen a change in the top observations issued by the FDA for food facilities. And so this is an important learning tool. This is a place that you can start at a minimum and say, these 10 things, these 10 or 11 things, I'm going to make sure my facility has down pat. And every time we go through the floor and we're looking at what is being done in operations, we're going to make sure these are done. And that's a great tool to, when the FDA comes, you're going to be a step ahead, and you're not going to have these most common observations listed on the Form 483. And so what you'll also notice in this is that a lot of these, almost all of these, are process-based. They're looking at the process of production, of storage, of handling to ensure that there's a likelihood of safety. And so that's very important, that these are process-oriented, and it also tells us that those more serious violations, those that really are indicative of adulteration or indicative of misbranding, those are going to be typically handled through another mechanism. They can come through in the Form 483, but typically they'll either be immediately a warning letter after a review of labeling, or there'll be a for-cause inspection, and there will already be that issue of adulteration, say, in a situation of an outbreak, and now the FDA is looking for the processes that led to that outbreak. So a lot of these are process-oriented, and again, it's something that we can control through good manufacturing practices. So now we'll move into another category. Here we're looking at the top drug observations, and again, what we'll see is that this area is one that actually has seen some change. We'll look at the other category here in the device section, and that one has not either. But here with drug, we've actually seen 3 new observations that were lifted from lower in the list to the top 10. So that is a bit of a surprise. Typically these areas are very stable, but here we have actually some change. And so what this tells us is that the FDA may be more active in this area, and this is definitely the case in 2013 with compounding pharmacies now being brought into the fold and being inspected on a for-cause and a surveillance basis. And again, we also see in this that a lot of these are process-based. A lot of these are relating to record keeping, cleaning, procedures, all of those things that are good laboratory or good manufacturing practices. And this is, again, because adulteration or misbranding will typically be caught by another mechanism, a complaint, an adverse event, or a review of the labeling. And so what we'll see in all of these observations is that they're very process-based, which is great because we know that there is a mechanism, there's good manufacturing practices that we can implement to ensure that these observations don't occur in our facility, and that way we have a leg up, we have an advantage when it comes to the time for our observations and our inspection in the facility. Next we move to the top device observations, and the top device observations are also surprisingly stable. Only in this case 1 new observation moved from lower in the list to the top 10. So this category, again, as long as we've been working in this area, it's been unchanged. We continue to see these same processes being identified as the most common violations. And so again, these are all process oriented, related to record keeping, documentation, and this is a way that we can proactively look at this list and develop changes. And being that this list is so stable, this really does give you an advantage to understand those regulations that are causing the most difficulty and causing the most, lead to the most Form 43s and then to most warning letters. And that's also an important point to raise here, is that we are looking at very common observations, and a lot of these don't look very serious on their face. And that's why it's so important to have a very good response, because the FDA is saying, look how pervasive these are in the industry. This is something you should be aware of. This is something you should be able to control, and you should have a very clear understanding of. And so when you do a hasty response, an angry response, something that's very dismissive of the FDA, this looks very bad because a lot of facilities have seen these observations and made corrections and were able to get out of a Form 43. And that's what makes the Form 43 response so critical. So next we're going to look at the total amount of observations that occurred, and what we've seen in the past 5, 6, maybe even 10 years is a dramatic increase in the number of inspections that are occurring. The FDA's budget continues to grow, and they continue to conduct both domestic and foreign inspections, and again that's important, foreign inspections are conducted, and what we see is continued growth. And even in this year when we had the government shutdown, there was still 5,050 observations formally recorded. There are some additional observations, as I mentioned at the beginning, where there will be an inspection, but there will be no observations issued. So this number could be closer to 6,000 or 7,000 inspections that are conducted. And again, this was amid the government shutdown, so this was about 2.5, 3 months where the FDA was shut down and not able to conduct these inspections. And what we see is that in the drug observations, this was the smallest number of observations in our purpose. It was a stable figure, 690, pretty consistent with the previous year. Almost 1,100 device observations. This was a growth of 9. Imagine if we didn't have the government shutdown, there could have been even more growth. And one of the largest centers within the FDA is the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, so no surprise that we see the most observations, the most inspections being completed there, with almost 2,400 Form 43s issued for food facilities, both domestic and foreign. And this figure was down a little bit from 2012, not significantly, but again a small drop, and likely a drop that can be accounted for by looking at the government shutdown. And so this doesn't account for all of the Form 43s and the inspections. Not all the categories were included for our discussion today. But if you do want to have some additional statistics and information on those, we're happy to provide them. For example, we didn't include veterinary products, and that is an important category, and we can definitely supply you with the number of observations and the top observations that were conducted for that category, as well as some other category like human tissues and some additional areas there. So before we leave you today, we're going to just give you a brief overview of the steps to building a very strong FDA Form 43 response and hopefully avoiding that warning letter. And again, it's not always the response. Sometimes the violations are so significant that on their face they will result in a warning letter, but sometimes it is the response. And so what you want to make sure is that you completely understand the Form 43 that's been issued. If you have questions, the field investigators in our experience have always been very friendly and happy to answer those questions. Make sure you're addressing each observation. Don't just go through and quickly address what you think is the general issues. Make sure you're addressing every observation. Be specific in how the observations will be corrected. This really requires you to go into the regulations to look at how the law or the guidance documents are telling you what should be done, and then making sure that you're meeting those standards. Again, make sure you're avoiding an angry or hasty response. It's not good to go and to be angry with the FDA. They're there to help and to work with you. And again, avoid raising legal challenges. If you think that an observation is incorrect or that the FDA is out of bounds, you really need to consult with experts to know the law, who know the regulations, who have that experience of working with several Form 43 and warning letters. And there are times where we do push back and we say that that observation is not within the authority of the agency or not within the regulations. But again, it's really important to make sure that you're consulting with an expert before you take that step, so that way it's an appropriate legal argument and it's not something that can be quickly dismissed. So again, thank you for joining us. My name is Marc Sanchez. I'm a Senior Counsel and Founder of FDA ADDI, Contract In-House Counsel. I'm happy to be available for any questions or any comments that you have, so please feel free to reach out by email or by phone, and thank you again for joining us today.